Hey there, Lions! Did you know that you can get access to exclusive bonus audio content by joining our paid support group, the Lions of Liberty Pride? For as little as $5 a month, you can help us grow this program to new heights. Learn more by heading over to lionsofliberty.com/support.
Welcome to Electric Libertyland, here on the Lions of Liberty podcast, your weekly shot of culture, comedy, and liberty with your host, Brian McWilliams.
Hello, one and all out there in Liberty Land. Top of the morning to you. This is Brian McWilliams, as the lady said. And this is Electric Libertyland, episode number 20, which means you can find that at lionsofliberty.com/ELL20. Now, I'm going to have a guest on this show. I'm very excited, actually, to have him on here. It's going to be a relative and a friend of mine, a relative who was married in October. One Stephen Betz, who is he's my brother-in-law. But interesting guy. Great take, super intelligent, funny guy, and oddly enough, he actually used to work and do a lot of casework because he's a lawyer with the police departments in the San Francisco Bay Area. So he's got an interesting take on what we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show, which is getting into a ruling by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals about a police officer who came to a man's door, banged on it, didn't identify himself, and then shot the guy dead. So listen up, because that's going to be a little later in the show. And we'll start off today just hitting on a couple topics that I wanted to get into before I bring Stephen on. The first of which involves Vladimir Putin visiting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And there's not, I don't even know much about what they talked about. All I know, because it's been blown up by the media, is that Putin sat down for some unknown reason at a grand piano that was in the meeting room and just started to tinkle out a tune. And it is like literally almost to the extent where he would have failed any recital performance. And, I don't want to give the guy too much shit for it, because I do think it's funny. And why not? Tinkle around on the piano. What's the big deal? You're Vlad Putin, whatever. But I do want to play a snippet of that taken that Sputnik shared on social media, and what I have dubbed Putin on the Ritz. You're so talented, my Vladimir. I am bursting at the seams with pride. I don't know if that was half Arnold Schwarzenegger and half Russian accent. I need to practice these accents beforehand. Anyway, that's sweet little Vladimir tinkling away. Moving on to the next thing on the agenda. So here in California, Governor Brown is mulling over the idea that's been put forth by all of these feminists and all of these social justice warriors and all these other people, that $50 million of our budget, of my tax money, should be going to fund Planned Parenthood. Now, let's remind ourselves what Planned Parenthood is, okay? Planned Parenthood is a nonprofit, which means that it's supposed to depend on charity, not coercive force and taking people's taxes without them having say in it. Because this is now something where, if it gets put into place, I guarantee you it'll pass. There's no question about it to me, because everything passes if it's a tax in California, and it's a bleeding heart liberal issue. But what I don't understand is how these people can rally behind it and be ignorant of the fact that there is a very sensitive topic around abortion. I mean, abortion is one of those issues where you're never going to meet. If you ask 10 people on the street, you're probably going to get 5 people that are pro, 5 people that are against it. And I fall on the side of being very pro-choice. A lot of people I know, especially in the libertarian community, are very much against that. They're very pro-life. And again, it comes down to when does life begin? When do the rights begin? That sort of conversation, which is very difficult. But at the same time, for these people to say, oh, well, we've got to fund it. $50 million out of our budget, which, by the way, California's budget is always it's always shit. it's always overextended because they have so many underfunded liabilities with all of the unions they've made deals with that we're constantly in a horrible state of debt, despite being like an economy that's bigger than most countries. But it's always mismanaged. There's always these special interest groups that are sucking cash out of the pot. And now this is just another thing. So let's just throw $50 million more at it. And the funniest thing to me was I was reading these tweets because it was like, hashtag CA for Planned Parenthood or something like that. And this one woman, she is standing up there and she goes, Planned Parenthood should be compensated for their services. That's like, well, okay. If they want to be compensated for their services, then they're a business and people should pay the money. That's how this works. If you're a nonprofit, you don't get paid for your services. You have people donate charity, and that's something that is left up to them to do on their own accord. It's not done via taxation. And I've made this point before, but if all of these people who are going on social media and taking to the streets and putting on their stupid pink clothing would simply sit down and write a check for $50 to Planned Parenthood, you'd easily cover the gap that you're trying to fund with taxation by demanding that people take it out of their paychecks and put it towards this organization they may or may not support. So put your money where your mouth is. That's how charity works. You want this charity, you go ahead and you support it with your money. Don't force everybody else to, you goddamn hypocrites. All right, that's enough of my ranting alone for this episode, I think. What? Yes? Okay, let's bring in our guest. All right, Electric Libertylanders, as I mentioned, I've got a very, very special guest on today's podcast. I'm excited to have him. He happens to be relation now. I can't say he's blood, but he is related to me by virtue of my lovely wife. People are still astounded I'm married. But yes, the great Stephen Betz, guys. Hey, Stephen.
I'll give myself a round of applause. I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Please do. And Stephen's up in Northern California. He is a lawyer. So Rico will probably be very, very jealous that we've got another lawyer in the midst here at the Lions of Liberty podcast. But, if he didn't commit suicide by now, what's going to push him over the edge, right? I don't know. You'd think we would have done it. But anyway, so yeah, man, I'm glad to have you on the show. So to start off, because I think it's interesting. I want to give people a little bit of backstory. So Sandy, my wife Sandy, her family is very conservative, I would say, conservative/libertarian on the mother's side over, and they're all in Minnesota / North Dakota, right? Or South Dakota?
Minnesota, North Dakota border.
North Dakota. Yeah. My geography
it's all the same. It's all
on
the
point.
Dakotas.
That's so great. Yeah, Fargo, North Dakota. They're by Fargo. I always get them mixed up. So yeah, so they're all very conservative bent, I would say, but more on the libertarian side of things. And then, of course, but her father's side, her father's right here in L.A., and he's more of the liberal bent, but very intelligent guy, also a lawyer, runs in the family. So it's interesting, though, to see talking to Stephen back when we were, I was first dating Sandy and we were getting to know each other more. You're very, I'd say you weren't very liberal, but you had a liberal streak, but you were very willing to have a discourse about it, which was always, fantastic. So I'm wondering, now that you are a person that listens to the Lions of Liberty podcast and is a part of our forum, I'm curious where you are now.
I would probably now consider myself a conservative Democrat, which is probably something that is a endangered or extinct species.
Well, it reminds me of Robin Kerner. If you're familiar with him, he is the blue or the God, what are they called? The blue dog. Blue dog Democrats. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but just I guess just generally because on things like as you said, I'm a lawyer, and when it comes to legal issues, I tend to be. Although I don't really see it as a conservative versus liberal issue, but it tends to fall that way. The way that I look at judicial philosophy and how I think the law should be interpreted tends to be much more on the right as far as originalism and textualism versus like living document theory, which tends to be more associated with liberals. So on that, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I tend to be very conservative.
So that's just a quick question on that then. So Neil Gorsuch, the new Supreme Court nominee, where do you fall on him?
I love him.
I figured you might.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, he's he's a conservative, very conservative justice as far as he's a a Scalia disciple. He's an originalist. He's a textualist, and for people who aren't really up to date on that, it's basically that's a philosophy that when you're trying to interpret something that is vague in the law, you try to apply the meaning that it had when the law was passed. So when it's constitutional law, unless it was one of the amendments, you try to find the meaning that it had when the people who passed it, what they thought it meant, versus more liberal thinkers tend to try to, they call it legal pragmatism, where you try to think, well, you can't always have the same stodgy old meanings. You try to apply new meanings to it. But I think that when it comes to law, that can be a slippery slope in the sense that it's great when that falls on the side that when the result is something you like, it's wonderful.
Right? Yeah.
But when it's not what you want. And I think that when you might not always agree with the original intent is of a law or trying to interpret something, but at least everybody's playing the same game when you approach it that way. And so I'm a big fan of Gorsuch because of that, and I think he's a good jurist. So I think it's probably, I know we'll probably talk about Trump a little bit later on. Mm-hmm. I think that is probably the only good thing that Trump has been able to do in his presidency so far. So yeah. I mean, Gorsuch, I agree. I'm a big fan of Gorsuch. I like originalists because it always bugs me when people say, well, we should re-examine the Constitution, make it this living document, and say, well, those principles don't apply now because of X, Y, and Z. But when it's the intent of the law, when it's the intent of the words that were written, you say when it gets down to Second Amendment rights or Fourth Amendment rights and, search and seizure and the right to bear arms and those type of things, you say, well, the intent of that wasn't, people say, well, people don't have muskets anymore. You're like, no, people have much worse weapons now, which is all the more reason you should be able to defend yourself with said weapons, or search and seizure. They argue all these different interpretations of the law. And you go, well, the intent of the law was just to protect you. It was written to protect the citizens. So if you're arguing anything other than that, I don't see how it can really apply. Right. Yeah. And that kind of is with, that argument is always, you do hear that argument with the Second Amendment often about, it's outdated because now we have such more high powered weapons and more dangerous weapons. But, obviously these are broad principles. These are not, there's nothing very specific about it, right? If we're going to compare to the First Amendment, can you only have discourse in a town forum and not over Twitter? I mean, of course, that wouldn't apply at all. So that seems like a very bizarre, but you do see that argument come up often, but it's silly. Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned the First Amendment. I mean, you and I, we'll go back and forth. So Stephen and I will text and talk about it on Facebook and stuff like that. But one of our topics of conversation is often the social justice warriors and their interpretations of what are they going to get upset about this week type of thing. And, when you talk about First Amendment, it just, the whole concept, and this is just going off on a tangent we didn't discuss before the show, but such is life. But, I was talking about on my last show how, hate speech, and I was equating hate speech to Orwell in 1984 and this, the revisionist language they were using and trying to simplify everything down and eliminate certain words and control people's speech, which essentially is controlling thought. I mean, if you extend that into how it actually impacts the world, if you limit what people can say or how they can express themselves, you're limiting the way they can think in a certain manner. And when it comes to First Amendment rights, I look at what's happening throughout the world. And I look at, these people that are standing up and you went to UC I'm going to get this wrong, Santa Barbara? I went to Santa Cruz. I went to the hippie school. Hippies, yeah, there you go. So exactly. I knew it was one of the UCS somethings. So yeah, you went to UC Santa Cruz and, you haven't had it happen there as it happened in Berkeley. But I mean, where do you fall in this? Seeing this happen, seeing these schools like Berkeley was this bastion of free speech, like they were known for the free speech movement, and then you see them standing up and rioting and beating people and going against anybody on the campus that doesn't have these liberal values. I mean, what do you think of this? What's happening today? I think it's I think what's really strange about this is even mentioning where Santa Cruz when I went there. Obviously, that's a very, very progressive school. I mean, I don't think there are 5 Republicans in the entire campus, and but I don't. And when I went there, I'm 32 years old. When I went there, it was during the height of the Iraq War, and that was a big issue on campus. And I think all the campus activism was focused on that issue. But I don't recall there ever being stuff like you see today about shutting people down. And I remember Victor Davis Hanson. He's a writer for National Review. He's an extremely conservative historian. He came and gave a speech, I remember, at like one of our big lecture halls, and I remember going to it and watching it, and it was nothing. There was no protests. There was no outrage about it. It was just, as kind of what I suggest for people now. If someone's speaking and you don't really care for it, just ignore them. And they're probably, if they're a marginalized and reactionary belief like some of these knuckleheads have who are trying to go to response, people will just ignore them. And I think it'll just move on and nobody will care. But when you give them people call it deplatforming, right? They want to try to take away you have a right to speak, but I have a right to kind of obstruct it if I want. But I think what you're doing is you're platforming. If you're like someone like Milo Yiannopoulos, I knew who he was because I listened to a bunch of podcasts and I try to listen to all the different points of view, and I knew who he was just because I spent too much time on the internet. But I think before that Berkeley thing, and then 2 weeks later when the whole story broke about him and saying all the stuff about the child sex or whatever he said, that kind of
that was all
ended his career.
Shit anyway, though. That was ridiculous. Anyway, sorry, continue your point.
But before that happened, I think your average person had no idea who this guy was, and he was kind of like an Ann Coulter type who's tried to say incendiary things all the time to get people riled up. And until the Berkeley thing, he was certainly not a household name. I think internet dorks knew who he was. But other than that, I don't really think he was that big of a deal.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he definitely wasn't that. He wasn't as well known before the Berkeley thing. But I mean, to your point, though, or to your point, I guess. But as you mentioned, but it did, this whole child molesting thing, which just to clarify that if people don't know. So like I said, I said that was total bullshit. And the reason I say that is because knowing a lot of, and I'm sure, as you probably know, you live in San Francisco. So I'm sure you know a lot of gay people. You're friends with a lot of gay people. I have a ton of gay family, a ton of gay friends. So what Milo was saying essentially was that people in the gay community, like there is a relationship that exists, and it is very true to life, wherein younger men it might be ostracized from their friends, or they might be scared to talk about their sexuality because of social pressures or different pressures that exist in the world, and they'll be coming out as young gay men, and they will be mentored in a sense by older men. And where he got in trouble, as I guess he was saying, well, I don't know what, he didn't want to say that you could put a certain age on when that happens, but he wasn't advocating for people to go out and just, bang little kids and bang little boys. Yeah, and that's what it got blown up into, and that in itself sickens me, though, because people made it into this witch hunt because they wanted to silence his speech. And by virtue of that, all of these comments got taken out of context and blown up. And it's especially shameful when you look at it and say, conservatives were doing it as well, but the liberal media gleefully jumped on it. And you say, as the liberal media side of things, shouldn't you be more understanding? But of course they weren't, because they didn't like what he had to say on the other side. When he wasn't talking about gay sex, they didn't like it.
Right. So what is he doing these days? Is he making a comeback or something?
He is. Yeah. He's going on a speaking tour. He's going to colleges. I projected with my PR hat on that in truth, all of this backlash, and like you said, giving him a platform blew him up. I said, even though he got all this stuff and he got his book deal from Simon & Schuster canceled. Well, he's got another book deal, because as somebody would be insane not to jump on it, because people will read it just to see what he has to say now. And he's going on a speaking tour. He's got another multimedia platform he's going to launch because he resigned from Breitbart. But I think he's in a better position now to succeed because of everything that's happened. Despite the fact that there were some detractors, I think he's going to take off and just be completely fine. I'd probably change places with him in a second and make a lot of money.
Well, you just got to start saying crazy stuff like him and Ann. And
I'm trying. Have you listened to this podcast? God, I try every damn day. But anyhow, so I would ask you one more question, and then we'll get into this case with the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals about gun rights and well, not even gun rights. Well, we'll get into it in a minute, but. I am curious because, like I said, I see you get more involved and more interactive with the forum and obviously listen to the podcast. So I'm wondering, has the insidious nature of libertarianism started to worm its way into your psyche?
A little bit, sure. I mean, I think one thing that I've probably changed a lot from over the course of the past year is I've become more more of a localist, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I'm not huge on large federal programs that I'm kind of curious to see where, for example, where the AHCA will go, and how it'll change the ACA. But I think where I would, because I think that generally, with any kind of program, any kind of government, when the closer it is to the community that it affects, the more accountable it is, and the more efficient it can be to the extent it can be. So if it can be done on a local level, great. If it can be done on a state level, great. And I think that there's other questions too about what is the fundamental, what's the proper role of the federal government. And of course, as I'm sure you know, being a libertarian and being involved in the movement, that role has expanded dramatically throughout the course of American history. American history
for sure. Yeah,
that was a little broad, but yeah, American history. So, so for example, like I'm kind of watching this healthcare thing unfold and see where that goes, and I'm not too hysterical about it. I think, but in contrast, though, I think California is trying to pass a broad healthcare act on the state level, and I'm more optimistic to just see where that goes and see if it works out. And if it's a disaster, then we can change it. But I think on the state level, at least, if something's a disaster, it's probably easier to change than when something becomes a federal law. You can't fix it. I mean, we see that with Social Security. It's becoming this unfunded liability that because it's tied to your paycheck, we can't change it.
Right? Yeah. No,
so it's just becoming this.
Exactly right. Yeah. No, you're making a great point. And I'm praying that the California universal health care bill that they're trying to push through does not pass, of course, but it is true. You can do a lot more to change it. You can bring it back and rein it in and say, this is terrible. Now, granted, knowing California, whatever passes is not going to be repealed. That I can guarantee. But, I mean, it's like, just like you said, once something on basically anything the government does, it's so hard to get it back. Like, I mean, you look at things like the Patriot Act, which we would all think by this point, we would have seen how dangerous that was and how much, like during Obama's administration, you had all this spying with the NSA and all this crazy overreach into our personal lives, violating so many of the statutes of the Constitution. And yet it's still out there. Like the Patriot Act, quote unquote, died and something exactly the same replaced it, because once it's out there, and trying to get that back is nigh on impossible. So one more reason to say, like, try to do things as locally as possible, because trying to change anything on the federal level is just, it takes years. I mean, look at it. The GOP they control the House and the Senate right now, and they got goofball Trump in office, and they still can't get rid of Obamacare. Like the AHCA that's going to pass, to me, is doing almost nothing. Like, I mean, it's making it worse if you arguably, because they're rolling back the mandatory signups. So what's going to pay for all the people that were causing the price increase to go up in the first place?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think the some of the it's funny seeing the one things that I thought that they're approaching that I think are good in that bill are actually the thing that's probably gotten the most hysterical and nonsensical response would be the rolling back on the pre-existing condition mandate and the required benefits mandates for the what must be covered under the on the exchanges, because that of course is something that this healthcare is something that there are always winners and there are always losers, because it's a finite, scarce resource. So you can't just legislate away the cost of it and just magically there'll be more of it. So obviously when it comes to the pre-existing condition issue and what's required to be within any healthcare bill, it's either if this cost is going to either rise for the people who have the pre-existing conditions, the people who need healthcare most, and then you're going to have to spread it across everybody else, or you're going to try to put those costs on the people who actually need it the most. So really the question is, what do you think is the most fair thing to do? And we can't even talk about that.
No, I know exactly. It gets too emotional. People go, well, I just love. They immediately go to. So you just want to let people die then? You're like, well, I mean, I don't want them to die, but at the same time, I don't want my healthcare to go up by 200% to keep them alive. Because you know what? I don't know that guy. It's not my problem. I mean, it sounds terrible to say, but.
well, the Jimmy Kimmel thing. Did you see that? That kind of blew up last week.
Oh,
a sad story about his son. But I mean, I was watching that and I thought, I call me naive, but I don't think that even if some parents had a child with a heart defect like that, I don't think that the hospital would ever just let it die.
No, they don't.
I think that,
they absolutely don't.
You know,
You're just in. I mean, look, you go into debt, and debt's. I mean, look, debt's horrible. Debt is definitely a killer of freedoms in a sense, because it limits what you can and can't do. But yeah, your child's not going to die. They can't. I mean, hospitals can't turn away people. If you ran in there with any sort of affliction, they can't turn you away. But you're going to have a large amount of debt. And what bugs me though is that people, they seem to think that, okay, well, people can't afford healthcare, so we have to have the government provide it. But all that happens then is that healthcare costs continue to increase. I mean, I compare it to, like, if you look at anything else in the marketplace that you say, okay, what's government not involved in? And you look across the free market and everything's gotten cheaper. You know, cell phones cheaper, cars cheaper, TVs, like, maybe your car's gotten cheaper, but it's gotten infinitely better. Like, you can watch TV in your car now and it talks to you. But, it's all these advances where this car would have cost you $100,000 10 years ago. Now you get it for $15,000 and it's off the back of the Kia lot. And healthcare is the one thing which it's only gotten more expensive. The more government's gotten involved, the more expensive it's gotten. And the same thing if you look at education as well. Because you have all these programs that say the government's we're going to go and we're going to pay for your tuition for here and we're going to support it here. And all that the colleges do, just like all the healthcare companies do, they go, okay, well, the government's going to pay for all this and we're covered here, so we'll just charge more for it. I mean, education is a prime example of that. Every time it's actually quantifiable. You look at the amount of government backing that goes into all of these educational programs and all these secondary schools and colleges, they raise the tuitions accordingly. Because
right, yeah.
Why?
You create more demand for a product, it's going to become more expensive.
Right.
More
demand, and they know they have big daddy government backing them up, so they know that the loans aren't going to fall through. They've got the government paying for it. So it's just, it's all just insanity, man. It frustrates me because, and like your point earlier about the fact that once these things are in play, they're hard to roll back, is now people are to the point where nobody knows the world before the massive insurance companies were in play. So they can't think of a world where, you just go to a doctor and, you might have insurance, but you have insurance you have catastrophic insurance, or you have insurance through a fraternal organization or something like that covers you if something really bad happens. But for the most part, you don't have insurance that mandates you have all these different coverages. You go to the doctor and you pay for a service and it costs $150.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, I think I was listening to one of your colleagues, Mark Claire's podcast.
Yeah, with the good doctor from last Monday. Yeah,
right. And he made a good point about, like I said, I like how they're taking away the mandatory benefit packages. Right. So before he was able to buy in the individual market a catastrophic insurance plan, and if you're 25 years old and you don't have any chronic health problems, it's probably a great thing for you for as an individual consumer. But when you have to buy something that has all these requirements, it's like, if you drive a Pinto and you have to buy a Tesla's insurance, it's kind of
yeah, exactly.
That's a problem. So
exactly, and that's exactly what's happening. And from that same episode, and again, I'll link to this, guys, in the show notes, lionsofliberty.com/ELL20. But they also give an example. The woman on the show, and I'm blanking on her name right now because I'm a terrible person, but she's part of the surgery center where they do surgeries, non-insurance. You go in, you get your tonsils removed. It's $2,500. And if you did that through insurance, you're paying I had back surgery a year and a half ago. And now back surgery is not the same as tonsil surgery, but it was a pretty straightforward surgery. I had an excellent doctor. It took an hour and a half, something like that, in and out, just cut away some of the cartilage and sew me up. But it was, something like $15,000 or $20,000. And then my portion of that bill was still $5,000 or $6,000. And, you look at, you say, okay, well, if you have these non-insurance options where they don't have to do all this other stuff, it's not involved in the system, you could probably do it much cheaper, because it really was a fairly straightforward operation. So if she's doing this kind of thing, it's clear that the market can provide these services, and that the involvement of the government, the involvement of the insurance companies has not made things better. It's just complicated the issue and made things more expensive.
All right. I don't know. Here's the thing. This is one of the. He got so much flack for this comment, but it's probably, I think, one of the smartest things that our president has said when he said, "No one knew healthcare could be so complicated," or whatever. I think I'm paraphrasing it. And that's just kind of the funny fiction about this. I love going online and watching people who I read the news every day. I try to educate myself on every subject that I ever talk about, but I know I'm not an expert on 90% of them, or what I would consider an expert in 90% of them.
That's amazing. Social media, you think everybody's an expert.
But yeah, then I read Twitter and I read Reddit and I read my friends on Facebook, and I'm like, man, all these people seem to really know a lot about healthcare, and I don't know what I'm talking about,
Well, dude, it's like I went off on this, and I think you were commenting on it, maybe on this post on Facebook, but I just posted the simple thing about everybody was driving me insane because they're posting all this 24 million people just lost healthcare. And I was like,
there you go. Yeah.
Oh God. It's like, no, none of that's true. Like everybody is reposting it authoritatively. And I was like, you people you didn't even read what you're talking about. No, you don't know anything you're talking. You're just parroting this one phrase, and it's not even rooted in truth. It's like, listen to last episode if you want to know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to go into it here with Stephen and waste his time, but yeah, man, it's so frustrating.
It's amazing how with more access to information, we all are more easily misled by silly facts or misstatements of truth.
You know what it is? There's so much information out there, and there's so many outlets now that people just, it's the confirmation bias, where you just go out and you can find what you're looking for immediately, and you're fed that by Google because of the algorithms that show you stuff that's more in line with what you've already looked for. Facebook, which also does the same. So, you don't even have to work for it. And we used to have 4 news outlets back in the 1970s, and they told you the news, and they tried to do a good job of being fairly impartial. And now it's like, you've got all these news sources that they feed you exactly what you want to hear. And people get their news from social media. I get a lot of my news from social media. Thank God I've got a friend who sends us about 40 news links named Howie Snowden from the podcast. He sends about 40 news links every day from everywhere. So that keeps us fairly well informed. But yeah, you go on there and people just, you made a very good point that the more that is out there and available to us, the easier it is to custom cherry pick the news that agrees with your philosophy. Yeah.
And, you're sifting through all this stuff and you never seem to know. I mean, you can do it. You just have to, it is a time consuming, endeavor that, unless you're, you gotta, I can't imagine, I don't have kids, so I can't imagine if I had kids and I had, 1 free hour a day.
Right. Yeah. You're getting puked on, puke's running down your neck, and you're trying to figure out what news outlet's actually giving you the straight deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is this Slate article nonsense? Oh, well, of course it is.
I'll say Slate. I can read Slate. I think they're okay sometimes. I will say though, Vox and Salon, I can't read ever. Never. Can't read them.
Slate, at least Slate, it comes to you and they present themselves as a progressive viewpoint, so you kind of know what you're getting.
Yeah.
Vox is very they try to present all their information as if this is just the straight dope, it's not. It's a very progressive, slanted, publication. Yeah. I think it's owned by the guy who runs Daily Kos.
Oh, you know what? You might be right. Is it Eli something or? Anyway, yeah, you might be right. And it's people, anytime somebody posts like that, you're in an argument with somebody and they're like, let me show you this. And they post a Vox article. I'm like, you've just made your position worse.
Yeah. During the election, there was always someone who dropped a Vox truth bomb.
Yeah. Well, it's like Huffington Post during the election. They had, Huffington Post is a respected news organization. People view it as a source of actual news, and they view it as an impartial news source. And
who respects them as news?
Well, I don't respect Huffington Post news, but let's say liberals respect Huffington Post news as a valid news source. And they would post, you read any article on Trump, and you get to the bottom of it, and there was a paragraph disclaimer that said, and I'm not making this up, this is not hyperbole, it said Trump is a lying, misogynistic piece of shit. Like literally, like that's what it said at the bottom of the article. So they wrote this whole piece, which was written as a news article. And then at the bottom, it's like, and by the way, he's a huge piece of shit. It was an editor's note. Like, and you go, okay, well, clearly people are getting unbiased news from this news source, but people kept posting the articles anyway.
These are adults, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, use critical thinking. Okay, all right, enough. We've been shooting this shit for 30 minutes, so let's move on to the actual topics here. Okay, so let's talk about this Court of Appeals, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And I'd send you this article because I wanted to get your take on it as a lawyer.
Yeah.
Because it actually fascinated and disgusted me. And essentially what happened in this case was that the 11th Circuit Court found that an officer, what happened in this case is that an officer came to somebody's house in the middle of the night, as they want to do with the drug war ongoing as it is. So at 1:30 in the morning, this guy who, hey, may or may not have been dealing drugs, but he's up playing video games with his girlfriend. Somebody's banging on the door. Bang, 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 real hard. So it's 1:30 in the morning. The guy owns a gun. He may or may not deal drugs. So he gets his gun out, but he goes to the door and, with his gun, but he goes to the door and he opens the door and he sees this figure there and he jumps back and the cop, it turns out it's a cop at the door. The cop, instead of saying, hey, what are you doing? Hey, it's the police. He never identified himself as a police officer. The cop opens fire, shoots him 6 times, kills him. Just like that. The 11th Circuit Court ruled that the cop had immunity in that situation. And their main argument, I guess, was that there was no precedent before this case to say that the cop was liable for shooting this man or that he did anything wrong. So what's your take on this?
So backing up a little bit, I sat and I read the opinion this afternoon, and I read the dissents too, and
I will read the dissent after you're done.
Yeah, read the dissent. They're good, but first of all, it's one of those things that when I first read it, I thought, wow, this is a doozy. Obviously the victim should never have been shot. That's plain. It's painfully obvious. The question is, was it a lawful shooting? And I think that a lot of people, when they look at these issues, they think the question is the same. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, it's not, because the Fourth Amendment only protects you from unreasonable searches and seizures. So you can be shot in a situation when you shouldn't have been, because you didn't actually pose a threat to an officer. But if it was a reasonable shoot, or which would be a reasonable seizure under the Fourth Amendment, then it's still a lawful shooting. And I was kind of confusing. But what that basically means is the Fourth Amendment standard for a reasonable, when an officer fires his firearm, the Fourth Amendment standard is when an officer in that person's situation, and that officer's situation, reasonably have perceived an immediate threat of serious bodily injury. So it's an objective standard, which is just, it can't be the officer subjectively just thought this. The question is, if any reasonable person was in there, would they have perceived a threat, basically? Mm-hmm. And so that is a very malleable standard, and it's a standard that has no real precise lines and boundaries, and it kind of, it can be very frustrating for people who read cases like these, for all of us who read cases like these and see, where it goes. So in this case, and you did a good job of summarizing the facts. Basically, from the officer's perspective, what happened is he was chasing a motorcycle that was going 90 or 100 miles an hour. He puts it out over the radio. The dispatcher tells him, oh, there's another motorcycle that we had just seen leaving some scene, and he was involved in an armed assault or battery with a firearm. So the officer's following him. He thinks it's the same motorcycle, or it may be the same motorcycle, I should say. And then he loses the motorcycle. And then he ends up finding it at this kind of motel area. It looks like there's a picture in here. It looks like one of those the kind of housing areas where you have kind of a bunch of townhouses. Mm-hmm. And so he shows up. He sees the motorcycle. He touches the motorcycle, and it's hot. And so he knows it's this. He knows that he thinks it's the same motorcycle he had just seen, and he knows this person just parked it. And so it's parked in front of this one apartment, or unit. And so then the other officers show up, and there's a second vehicle there also parked right in front of this unit, and they run the plates out, and the address comes back to some place, I think that's out of state, but it was both to the same name. So they assumed that, hey, maybe this guy might be in this apartment. So they go up to the apartment, and this is what I have to say. The thing that I find the most egregious in all of this, which I think would have probably solved the whole thing, is they did not announce they're police officers.
Right.
They just knocked on the door, loudly rapped on the door a couple times. And they also believed that this apartment was also singled out, I think, because it was the only one in the area that had its lights on. So they knocked on it 3 times, and then the guy inside, I think he was up playing video games with his girlfriend or something. He hears this rapping. Yeah, and this is like 1 a.m. too, so he thinks it's strange, and he goes and he gets his pistol and he opens the door. And according to the officer, what happened is the guy had it. The gun was pointed at the ground. The victim's gun was pointed at the ground, and he looked at the officer, and then he kind of pied back behind the door. Probably what he's doing is he saw the silhouette of the officer and didn't know what it was. Maybe he saw someone with a gun, and so he backed away from it.
Right.
The
So
officer,
I'm sure the guy had his gun drawn. Otherwise, he wouldn't have reacted that way.
They did have their guns drawn. The
Right.
police did have their guns drawn. So he backs behind the door, and the officer says he sees the gun, sees the guy kind of back behind the door. He mistakes it or believes that the guy's trying to get behind the door to get a position advantage on him. So he fires, like you said, like the 6 rounds, the guy, and kills the guy. So there's kind of 2 issues here that the court is addressing. One, and the first issue is really the kind of the root of it. It's the Fourth Amendment issue. Is this a reasonable shoot or not? And the majority said it was. And it was because the officer had first of all, reason to believe the person inside the house was armed, because they thought it'd be reasonable for him to think that the person associated with and for the record, I should say, the kid who was shot was not the guy with the motorcycle. He was off somewhere. They don't even talk about where he is. He obviously is somewhere around, but they don't talk about what happened with him. But this guy is totally unrelated to this. But the court basically said that because they pursued this motorcycle there, they had reason to believe that there was a suspect in that house with the pistol. That they approached it, they were allowed to, obviously contact the house, and that when the officer saw the firearm in his hand and saw him move back, it was reasonable for him to think that that was an effort for him to try to, get behind and start engaging the officer. Whether factually, whether you agree with that or not, I think that's one of these things that people can talk about ad nauseum around whether it's reasonable for an officer to think that or not. I think this case was a 5-6. It was an 11-panel judge, so it was really
only one
close.
dissent, right?
Yeah,
the issue, and the dissenting judge hits on the issue that the thing that bothers me the most about it, and because I can understand the officer thinking, okay, I saw a gun. The guy jumped back and saying, "I thought I was in danger of life." I don't agree with it, but I can see somebody thinking that. But I will, disagree with his actions and always say, "Well, you should have still yelled something or just ducked out of the way because you're outside the door. Why don't you just back away and get out of the firing line and say, 'Hey, put your gun down,' instead of just shooting a guy." But the dissenting judge, here's what he said. He said, "We have never before held the police can, without justification, provoke a panic and then hide behind it by claiming that everything happened fast." And that's that's my biggest problem, is that this officer or officers, they were the provocators of this incident. At 1:30 in the morning, if you're banging on someone's door, do you not expect them to react in this way? And we see this all across the spectrum of all of these drug busts, where they're busting in people's houses at 4 a.m, and somebody pulls out a gun after their door is kicked in and starts shooting. And then the cops say, "Oh, well, you're going to jail forever because you shot a cop." And you're like, "Well, what the fuck would you do?"
Yeah.
You know?
And for your listeners, I used to, for my professional background, I used to represent police officers in criminal and administrative.
That's why I wanted to discuss this case with you.
Yeah, and these issues I've dealt with professionally for a long time, and I think when I was reading through the facts and I got to the part where he didn't announce himself at the door, I thought, "Oh, that's a problem," because, like you said, the police are allowed to do their job, of course. Like, they're allowed to take this seriously. We want police to go out and do and try to apprehend criminal suspects when reasonable. And so I don't have a problem with them necessarily contacting the kid. I call him a kid. I think he was in his early 20s.
65-year-old.
Yeah, he's probably but I think he was a kid.
Yeah.
But I was shocked that that wasn't really more of an issue in the analysis, because to me, like you said, I actually believe the officer would have been, and you have to give deference to in the Supreme Court opinion that kind of sets the standards for police use of force is called Graham versus Connor, and it actually says in it there's a line that says you have to give deference to the fact that the officers are making split-second decisions out there in the field. Mm-hmm. But and so I trust the officer actually did, or I believe the officer actually did perceive that threat in that second. But I agree with you in the sense that I'm troubled that he didn't announce that he's a police officer when he knocked on the door, and I don't really know why. Because if you also catch when you read the facts, and I thought this is very bizarre too, in his deposition he actually said that he didn't treat the guy as a suspect at the time, and I thought. They're just kind of read the facts. He says that. I think I think what he meant was, it came out weird. I have to see what more of the record said, but I think what he meant was, I didn't know for sure that was the guy, but I thought he might be connected because of the motorcycle and everything. But I'm thinking, why are you not announcing you're a police officer?
Either way, I don't care if you're just coming by to give me a cookie. I still want you to say, "Hey, it's the police. Don't worry, I'm just giving you a cookie."
Right. So anyway, so so there's kind of two parts to this case, right? So the dissent says that they say no, it's good because it's a reasonable shoot. But second, there's a second issue that, let's say they kind of do this really just for academically, because they didn't have to address this at all once they found that the shooting was good because of the Fourth Amendment. But then they go into the qualified immunity issue. And for people who don't know what qualified immunity is, it's a theory that it's a court-made theory that is a defense for government actors and for city governments or for any kind of government to protect themselves from liability when they are being sued for a statutory or constitutional violation that has not yet been clearly defined. So, and the purpose of it basically is to try to limit frivolous lawsuits against local or against government entities, and to kind of permit government actors to go out and kind of do their job without having to worry about them kind of accidentally falling into like a gotcha violation. And so that's the reason why we have it. But and so they basically go into, the dissent basically says they should never be given qualified immunity because, we have all these cases that talk about, it's clearly going up and knocking on someone's door and shooting them without a threat is a clearly established right. And the majority says, well, there's this line of jurisprudence that says it has to be clearly defined. It has to be much more general than that. So the question is not just going up and shooting him. Would going up to the door and mistaking someone holding their firearm when they're lawful, when they have it lawfully in their home, and you mistake it, and you mistake that for a threat, is that a clearly defined right? In other words, that people can have firearms in their home. If someone answers the door with a firearm, but it's not pointed at you, can an officer perceive that as a threat? And the majority says they can. The dissent says no. But it's kind of been presented as a qualified immunity case, but it's really not, because they decided that it was lawful on the Fourth Amendment issue. So it's kind of like, it's weird they even bothered throwing it in there. I think this tend to be one of those things where these judges are trying to just get academic with each other, and there's really no point to it. But because I don't know why they even addressed it, because if
judicial masturbation,
right? Well, basically, because you only get to the qualified immunity question if you think that the shoot was bad, right? So if you say so you could have said this, it's clearly a constitutional violation to go up to someone's house, knock on the door, they answer it with a gun, and to shoot them. But because that we've never before held that was the officer's qualified immunity. Yeah. That's the only way that it could have come into effect in a substantive way. But since the majority said it was a good on the first question, the qualified immunity doesn't really matter. So I don't know why they even went there. But yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know that one of the takeaways from this case was that this is an opportunity to set a precedent. If they had ruled that you can't just go up and, without announcing yourself, shoot somebody, that it could now be used for future cases. But now there's no, there's still nothing out there. So the next time this happens, probably the same thing could very well happen where the same decision will be made because, again, there's no precedent.
It's precedent almost going. It is because of some weird way that they heard this. It's not precedent, but if anything, it'd be precedent going the other way against the plaintiff because they said the Fourth Amendment issue was they ruled in favor of the officer. So,
right? Yeah, exactly. So now it's like, thanks a lot, guys.
So kids, if you're listening to this, do not answer the door with the gun in your hand.
Yeah, don't answer the gun armed. Give the gun to your girlfriend. Tell her to pause. Tell her instead of, when every time you're playing a video game together, one person pauses it and you unpause and then you fuck them up while they're not looking. Instead of that, give your girlfriend the gun and tell her to keep it on the door while you answer. There you go. The more you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, no, I appreciate the breakdown on that case. Yeah, it's just so troubling. I think we covered it pretty well, but let's move in because I said a lot of this happens. The circumstances around this case, I don't know, this specific one may not have been, but a circumstance around a lot of police going to houses in the middle of the night and kicking down the doors and arresting people is centered around the drug war, if not all of them. Mm-hmm. And someone's getting pulled. Hold on, we're gonna live vlog that. We're live podcasting this. Some guy just got pulled over on the side of the road. I'm watching the cops pull over right outside my house.
Is he manhandling him out of the car?
Hold on. The cops are out of the car. They're approaching the vehicle. It's a Nissan SUV. He's asking for I don't know. He's telling him, it looks like she might have ran a red light. They're beating the hell out of her. No, none of that's happening. I'm closing the window again.
I think you're embellishing this story.
Maybe.
The LAPD has never been in trouble for civil rights.
They never put 26 bullets into 2 Korean women in a truck because it looked like some other truck. Okay, moving on. That was a fun little side. I'm going to keep my eyes though. I'm going to keep my eyes on them. If there's any brutality, we'll come back in a live news break, even though this is going to air 2 days from now. Okay. Moving back on to what I was talking about. So anyway, centered on the drug war. And that brings me up to the next topic I wanted to talk about is Jeff Sessions and basically this drug war 2.0, which is not really a 2.0, but it is a big rescindment of Obama era policies on the drug war, wherein, I did not like Eric Holder. In fact, I hated Eric Holder. But the one thing I did like about Eric Holder, and one of the few things I did like about Obama, was they decided they were not going to try to prosecute drug crimes, especially for nonviolent drug offenders when it came to, like the mandatory minimums, which who put into place? A lot of mandatory minimums and a lot of the 3-strike rule. Who? The Clintons. Yes, the Clintons. Anyway, moving on. But Jeff Sessions seems to want to harken back to the Clinton time, and he wants to put in the most harsh penalties for people no matter if they're nonviolent drug offenders, no matter what, if this rinky-dink bullshit, he wants to really sick it to people when they are in court for drug offenses. So what do you think about that?
I don't know politically what he's thinking. Because I'd be interested to see. First of all, there's the obvious issues, right? With this is a policy that I think has no real net good for society because you're just putting people away who. Incarceration should be something that is a punishment that is used for a very specific class of criminal, right? Someone that needs to be removed from society for a specific period of time because they're dangerous, because they've committed a very egregious crime. But people who are not engaging in that kind of behavior, which I think drug crimes, they're victimless crimes, clearly that they don't fit the bill. And I think I remember reading, I don't know if it was an article that we sent before the show or a different article, but I think Sessions' general explanation for it is this kind of outdated idea that it's almost this Minority Report idea that it's kind of like where there's drugs, there's guns. And it's, if you put away the drug offenders, they're more likely than the population at large to commit violent crimes, and I have no idea what the statistics on that are true or not. But it's almost irrelevant to me because you don't punish people for things they didn't do.
Right.
You punish people for things they did do. You know?
Exactly.
So it's extremely troubling. And I also one thing I was thinking about this too is, this country has an opioid crisis going on right now, and
quote unquote crisis, quote unquote crisis.
Whether or not, but this is something that will affect your this is obviously something that will affect people of color disproportionately, but it still has a huge effect on your Trump supporting folk. And I'm wondering what they're thinking. I mean, it'll probably disproportionately affect Trump land than it will, the suburban California. So I don't know really what the real end game is for this. It seems like it's bad policy. It's bad politics. It's ignoring all of it. It was crazy because I had, before he even went out on this tangent, I've been railing against Jeff Sessions because a few weeks ago, the polls came back. And the majority of Americans, something like 60% of Americans at this point, are in favor of just legalizing it overall, just legalize it. And Jeff Sessions was on record being like, I just don't understand. I don't get it. I don't get where people are coming from, and it's like, well, because you're an old dipshit, like your time has passed. Like, it was, of all the appointments Trump made, this was the most puzzling to me. And the guy, clearly, he doesn't care about public opinion, because this goes against all public opinion and all progress that's going on. And like you said, I mean, I love that you just said you're penalizing people for what you're projecting onto them their future, and you're penalizing that, and it's idiotic, especially in the context of, you look at the impact on minority communities, and you say, like, okay, well, people, a lot of these people, they're more inclined to be violent drug offenders, blah, blah, blah. But also at the same time, and the drug arrests are up in these minority communities and the poorer communities that are more into drugs. But what people don't like to realize is that at the same time, all those arrest statistics are like really pumped up by the fact that the communities that this is happening are also policed at like 12 to 50 times the rate that every other community is policed at. So of course you're going to have more arrest rates. In fact, they're probably fairly low. I mean, I would say they're probably lower than other communities because those people are on the lookout even. But you've got 50 cop cars driving around every day because they're trying to police it. Of course there's going to be more arrests. Of course there's going to be more drug arrests in these areas. It's a symptom. Yeah. It's like, is it a symptom of the disease, or is it the cause of the disease is the government, and the government involvement in all this? I think I read today that there's it was a 538 article, but it was an old one that written a couple of years ago. But even during Obama's presidency, when they were trying to cut down on this, there's about 200,000 people in the federal prison system, and 48% of them are people whose most serious offense is a drug offense. Yeah, that's insane.
Yep, and the majority nonviolent.
Yeah.
You're just putting people in jail for giving people a product they want, or using a product that they want or that they might need. And then you look at all the research too into veterans. I talk about this all the time. Veterans, the rate of suicide in veterans is astounding. And when you get them, you introduce marijuana use, medical marijuana, that rate drops precipitously. And even to the point where like MDMA is being used as a lot of therapeutic. And you see these people that would be dead and they're alive because of this drug. But, instead of letting people that would, instead of stopping suicide rates and letting people enjoy it, let's incarcerate people at a world high rate instead.
Right. Yeah. And I think too, especially for coming back to, I just don't understand the end game, especially if you are a traditional conservative or Republican like Jeff Sessions, or a libertarian where you believe in small or no government or limited government. When you have a system like this that incarcerates as many people as possible for the longest period of time, the unintended or intended consequences of that are you have to increase dependency on government programs and the state from the people who depended upon that person.
Right.
Who
Exactly.
Now, so if this person has a child, or that child is now only with one parent or no parent, and when this person gets out, if they've been incarcerated from the time they're 20
good luck
to
getting
30,
a job. Yeah,
they're not going to get a job. They're not going to get any training. They're not, you're going to have more people who are filling up the bread lines who could otherwise have been productive members of society. That's why I think your punishment. We were going. There was a lot of bipartisan support for this movement, away from mandatory minimums, away from the long sentences, because I think people started to realize the societal cost of this was way more, way outweighed any of the benefits of trying to lower kind of the violence that allegedly is connected to drug crimes, and now this seems to just completely derail that. And it's like
exactly.
I said, I just don't get it. The end game is just it escapes me.
Yep,
so, but like you said, he's an old fossil. I think when I hear him talk, I do think, wow, I feel like I'm in the Reagan presidency. It's like the good old days.
yeah, exactly, man. It's it's shocking that people can't seem to see, and you could tell when people are just on a crusade based upon their own bullshit, because the long game, and like you said, how it plays out in society is stark. People always talk about too, the rate of absenteeism fatherhood in the Black community is very high. And again, a lot of that is based on exactly what you're talking about, that these guys, a lot of people are being put away, and a lot of them just, they are breaking up family units. And then, what are you going to do when you come out? Not much. It's a system that it's like a cyclical system wherein they're just fostering dependency on the government. And for what? For people using something they want to use, they're not hurting anybody but themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's I think this is probably the most, I might regret what I'm going to say here, because there's so many.
This is Lions Liberty Podcast. This is Electric Libertyland, man. This podcast is built on regretting things.
Only regret because I just can't. I have to think of so many. But this might be the most destructive thing that I think that the new administration has done that I can think of. Well, I think it's
interesting you say that, because I've had a lot of conversations with my libertarian brethren, and we all unanimously, we did like a roundup show with our one of our Lions of Liberty libertarians that living rooms drinking liquor shows. But one of the topics at one point was, what's the worst thing right now? Like, what's the biggest threat to liberty? And I think almost unanimously we said it's the war on drugs, because not only of the immediate impact on people's liberties, being thrown into a cage for using something that you want to, you put in your body to feel better. But not only that, but because of everything we've been talking about, that cascade effect throughout society and how it impacts everybody, as from the first person to their family, to their business, all on down the line. And when you come out, just the impact that has on your ability to work and live and provide. I mean, it is unbelievable the impact it has on us. And you know what? It's all that son of a bitch Nixon's fault, because he started it.
Yeah. Well, maybe you go to get a job and you fill out the thing that says, "Have you ever been convicted?" The little box that says, "Have you been convicted of a felony?"
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm an employer and I saw just that, I would think, okay, wait, well, what'd he do? Did he?
Right. But I don't
did
think
he shoot somebody, or did he just
ask that or not?
Yeah. What was that?
Can you legally ask that as an employer? What the felony was?
I don't know if you can, I don't know if it's legally or not. I know that.
I don't know either. I'm curious to see if you can ask somebody about their felony or not, because I know there's a lot of weird things you can't ask people about when you're hiring them.
I'm assuming you could, in the sense that I don't think that's like a protected class thing.
Yeah, maybe not. But also, of course, let's not forget too, the secondary aspect of this is that once you are arrested for these things, once you have a felony conviction, whether or not it's for owning 2 grams of marijuana or not, you also can't possess a firearm and you can't vote.
Yeah, that's just.
Well, let's not forget that. So let's remember, how many people are in jail for felony drug crimes? Like half the prison population. They're now not eligible to vote either. So they ain't changing any drug laws. Yeah.
No, it's like I said, I have nothing to say other than it's a pretty bad idea, Jeff.
Damn, we're almost at an hour now. This has been fun. I was just like rambling on. All right, let me think. All right, I'll leave it up to you. We'll talk about one of two things, because I don't want to go too past over an hour here. But do you want to talk about James Comey firing and the recent? I don't know if you heard about this, but now there's apparently Trump was threatening something about releasing tapes about recording? Or do you want to talk about Hillary Clinton's new Onward Together political action committee? I leave it up. I leave it in your hands.
Let's talk about Comey. I think that's I have more to say about that than Hillary trying to be relevant still.
I agree. Hillary, it would have been a short conversation of me just being like, why? Just go away. Go away, Grandma. You smell like pee. Nobody wants you around.
I just hope that Chelsea doesn't get the torch. Jesus Christ.
You know what, man? If she does, I don't know if you've been reading a lot of Chelsea Clinton stuff, but she is honestly like, look, Hillary Clinton, I really dislike her, but she's not stupid. Chelsea Clinton is dumb as a wet brick.
Chelsea Clinton I read her Twitter every now and then because she just says the most vapid progressive stuff that she can think of that she probably read in a Slate article.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Repeats it, right?
Exactly.
What do my Twitter followers want me to hear or want to hear me say? I'll say that. So she's just so pedestrian.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like she would be the least inspiring. And if the Democratic Party could do itself no bigger disservice than running her out at this point in time.
Yeah. And I think they probably will, because I think I part of the reason why I call myself a conservative Democrat now too is because I think that they're going towards the progressive / justice Democrat route.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think that's clearly the writing on the wall. That's the future. And Hillary doesn't fit into that equation in any way. I don't know how she possibly can.
No. I mean, when you're protecting your husband against all the women, standing up for him despite the fact that he's finger banged 17 women in the bathroom of the Oval Office.
Right. Well, and the Clintons came into power because they ran on a platform that was, we are conservative Democrats. Yeah. Right. That was their entire political legacy is because of that. And so to run away from it is kind of like, Oh, it
was so funny. We're going off on this. Last thing, and then we'll get to Comey. I just thought it was so funny though during the election when I'm talking to all these Democrats, especially like a lot of women that are really progressive that I know that are super Hillary Clinton supporters, and I bring up the fact that I'm like, well, what do you think about the fact that she was vehemently against gay marriage? What do you think about the fact that she's defending Bill Clinton and slandering women after the allegations? What do you think about the fact that they put all these drug laws that have put basically made black people second class citizens because of the effects of them? And they're like, that never happened. I'm like,
Oh,
You're not a student of history. That's a true story, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember talking about the super predators comment hey, here's a great little, when we go into Comey, here's the great thing for our dear leader, Donald Trump. He is the only American president to assume office while being in favor of gay marriage.
I know, right? It's that, yes. And you see the marches. There were marches out there with all these people with gay pride. I can't even speak right now. Gay pride flags, and they're like, "Fuck Donald Trump," and I'm like, he's the only president in history that was pro gay marriage. Hillary Clinton's, by the way, not. She wasn't. She might say she's not. It's like when you see these, that's a progressive thing though. It's like people get wrapped up in this overarching umbrella of thought, like this group think, and they can't think for themselves. Like all these people that I know that were gay, I'd see them anti-Trump shit, and I'm like, he's on your side, man. Like, I mean, come on. Barack Obama, when he took office, was not pro-gay marriage. That only happened because he smelled the way the wind was blowing. Trump's been pro-gay marriage for like 20 years.
He smelled the way the wind was blowing, and Joe Biden accidentally outed him on. Wasn't that what? Didn't Joe Biden? It wasn't like Joe Biden made some comment like, "Yeah, we're in favor of gay marriage" before Obama had said it.
And Obama was like, out. "What, Joe?"
Yeah, and then Obama's like, "Damn it, Joe."
I hope that's true. I got to look that up now.
Look that up. Yeah,
I need to find out. Okay. So let's get to Comey. Okay. So just before anything, what do you think about Trump firing Comey? Or Comey? Is it Comey or Comey? I don't even know.
I think it's Comey. That's how I say it in my head, so I hope that's right.
Comey. Yeah.
I would refer to Hanlon's razor, which is never attribute to evil which you can attribute to incompetence. And I think that applies really well here, because I think that, as soon as he was fired, before he was fired, anybody thought that he was a good FBI director because of how he mishandled the Clinton investigation, right?
You should never, as an FBI director, you should have never in a million years said publicly that you're investigating a case before there's any allegations made.
And then when he went to the Clinton, when he went and gave that speech or the testimony to Congress, I think he asserted that no charges will be filed, which is not really the FBI's purview. That's the DOJ's purview.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
He became prosecutor and a chief investigator. I mean, he made some missteps that were the bottom line is everybody didn't like this guy, thought he was incompetent. And if he's incompetent then, or not right for the job then, he was not right for the job last week.
Yeah.
But this hysteria comes out that, I can think that, but also think that he's doing this because he's getting too close to the Russia egg, I guess, which I find so bizarre because on the one hand, we don't know. There's no evidence. What is this there? There's no there
still
there.
Nothing. There's no evidence there. If there was any evidence, do you not think someone would have leaked it by now? Something would have happened by now. This obsession the left has with this Russia connection, it boggles my mind. Because you know what? Look, Trump's got so many other things that you could go after. Why are they? I guess because they feel like they could still possibly impeach him or say that the election was rigged. And I don't get it.
I think they would have to have something so overwhelming to get a Republican House to impeach and a Republican Senate to convict him. It's just insane. But so there's no evidence that we're aware of yet. And like you said, if there was something with this White House, I think it would have been leaked by now.
Oh yeah.
People are screaming Watergate and Nixon, and again, even with that, I'm thinking you would think with Nixon was when Nixon had the Saturday Night Massacre. The thing about his tapes, and there was already evidence of misconduct that was out in the public. People knew the tapes existed. That was the point. And then he was trying to fire these guys to make sure it didn't come out. This is not like that because there's no tapes that there are tapes apparently that he talked about, but there's no.
He alleged, just to clarify that comment so people know if they're listening. So allegedly, Trump says there's tapes of conversations between him and Comey, which again, it's illegal to tape someone without their permission, but when you're the president and he's the head of the FBI, I guess you figure everything's taped anyway. So whatever.
Right. It's this. There's no evidence there for us to think that he was close to it. And then, to beyond that, the idea. So the idea that just because Comey's gone, that the FBI investigation is going to end. That the Senate's investigation is going to end, the House of Representatives investigation is going to end, that all these investigations are going to stop because Comey's not there. Even if he finds some patsy to replace him, those investigations are still going to go forward. There's no way. It's just going to stop.
Well, I think the real fear on the left is that now that Comey's gone, arguably Comey protected Hillary Clinton is I think what they're worried about. And I think now they're worried that if somebody else takes over, they might say, well, maybe we should revisit this. Because Comey also said, there's nothing in the emails that were found on Michael Wiener's computer that could indict Hillary as to any sort of violation of the I don't know what it's called, but whatever. She couldn't get in trouble. Is actually what he said. And I'm worried that I think the left is saying like now that's why they're saying, this is insane. Watergate is because they're worried that now Hillary Clinton might get thrown back onto the pyre and burned.
Well, maybe. I tend to think that they're genuinely freaking out about Trump because that's just the MO of the day. But maybe the actual people in Washington think that. But
they're calling authority. Yeah. They're like, authoritarianism. Yeah. Like, well, the president's always had the power to fire the FBI director. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Right. But I think it's very simple what happened here because people were like, well, why now? What's the timing? Why didn't you do this before? Et cetera, et cetera. Nothing makes sense. And I think it's. To me, it's very simple. If you remember the letter that he sent out when he fired him, the first line or the second line in it was, "Thank you for telling me on 3 separate occasions that I am not under investigation or I'm cleared," or whatever, however you phrase it. Right? He clearly wanted that statement out in public.
Yeah.
And we know that Trump's an egomaniac. We know that he has no experience in government. And we know that he's not, despite kind of being able to read the crowd, and obviously he won the election, so he knows enough about the power of persuasion and everything. Mm-hmm. But I still think politically he's an extreme novice because they make so many own goals. I mean, every chance they get, it seems like he's getting an own goal.
Yeah.
You know? So I think if you add those factors up, and then also there's these stories about how he had this dinner with Comey, and he wanted Comey to either publicly go out and say he wasn't under investigation, or to give him his loyalty, and Comey refused to do it. So I think if you add those things up, it's Trump was mad because Comey wouldn't come out and defend him in public, and so Trump said, "This guy's got to go because no one crosses me," and I think it's that simple. And so then they ask, was it Rosenstein, the deputy DOJ? They're asking to write up some memo to kind of justify it objectively, on a basis that everyone agreed with anyway. And then that he kind of used that as cover to get rid of him. And then Rosenstein, when he kind of became the fall guy, got mad about it. And so then the truth came out. Yeah. So I think that's all that is. And so now it'll be interesting to see who gets who replaces him. I think. Like Charles Krauthammer suggested having him appoint Merrick Garland, which would be hilarious. I
actually support that 100%. I think it would be the greatest political move ever, because if Trump put Merrick Garland in there, it would be one of those things that left me so mad, but they couldn't say anything.
That'd be furious.
Look, I have long consisted that Trump, he may be an idiot, but he's not a fool. And he plays, I will say, I can't ignore the fact that the man is president. And he got there through manipulation. He got there through playing the game. He clearly, look, you can't become president if you're an idiot. And people underestimated George W. Bush in the same way. George W. Bush, for all the ways people look at him, is not an idiot. He may be a fool, but not an idiot. Trump's the opposite. Trump is an idiot, but not a fool.
Well, that kind of just goes to the broader of liberals think conservatives are all stupid, and conservatives think liberals are all crazy.
Yes, so, exactly, man, exactly. But Trump, he plays a game, and I'm convinced of this now. I was very skeptical of it, but he plays a game that he is looking very, very far ahead, and I give him credit for that. I don't agree with what he's doing. But shit, man, the guy he keeps making moves. He keeps getting away with it.
Well, so what do you think the story behind the Comey termination is?
I think he legitimately, I think Trump actually does want to put Hillary behind bars. I believe that. I think he does want to do. I think he thinks Comey is not going to do it. I think he wants to find somebody that he can put in place where, as soon as it came out, where Comey said, like you said, 3 separate reasons or 3 separate times, not under investigation. He said, perfect. Let you go. I'm going to bring somebody in that's going to re-examine this Hillary Clinton thing and put her behind bars because again, she said some shitty shit. He wants to keep that promise, especially in light of the fact that the wall is not going to happen. So he can crow about making good on that promise to go after Hillary. So he's going to put somebody else in place. He's going to go after Hillary, which is going to be pretty easy to do. And he'll have somebody that's a little bit more aligned with him in that position. So I think it's if you're Trump, the wailing backlash, because here's the thing too. I shouldn't say we. The liberal media has put Trump in a position, and I was talking this with a friend of mine, a colleague, on the way home today. The liberal media has put Trump in a position where they have essentially built a suit of armor around him, because they constantly talk about how horrible he is and how much of a shithead he is and all this crazy stuff that's going on. But the thing is, they don't realize is that when you cry wolf that often and that consistently, all you're doing is layering armor onto the man, where his base now, because there's been so much, like the late night comedians and everybody on Facebook nonstop, the comedians nonstop, every late night show, every talk show, slandering Trump, going after him. They are just putting a suit of armor around him where his base has now tuned it out completely. So even when he does something that is really fucked up, that's just going to bounce off. And these people don't realize that. By being such partisan hacks, they've made him basically invulnerable.
Yeah. Well, being a comedian yourself, I mean, I cannot stand watching all these every single comic.
It's the same
they
jokes.
have to make. Yeah, it's the same joke. And I'm like, it's just the low hanging fruit, man. It's a Trump joke. Oh my god, you're so funny.
Fruit. That's the thing. Look, comedy ain't funny if I know the punchline before you say the punchline. Everybody knows the punchline. It's like with Trump, you know the goddamn punchline.
Yeah. But I don't know. People are just like, I like hearing the same joke over again because it validates me.
They do, man. I'm sorry, progressives do. They'll laugh every time, and they laugh like this. They go, ha 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 ha, because they need you to know they agree. All right, this is a good place to wrap it up, man. Let me tell everybody where to find this. So, guys, again, you can find the show notes for this episode at lionsofliberty.com/ELL19. I want to remind everybody to listen to Mark on Mondays with the in-depth interviews on libertarianism and libertarian leaders. Me on Wednesdays, John Odermatt with Felony Fridays. Again, follow us on Twitter at Lions of Liberty. If you want to support the podcast, please go to lionsofliberty.com/support. We've got awesome stuff there. There's also t-shirts you can buy at lionsofliberty.store. And that's it. I don't have really anything else to say. Oh yeah. Join the Facebook forum, of which Steven is a member.
You'll see me there. Yeah.
He's there. You can find him. You can yell at him.
With pithy commentary. So.
pithy to the nth degree. So, Stephen, man, this has been a lot of fun. I'm really glad to have you on the show. I'll definitely have you back. This time flew by. I hope the audience agrees, but
I hope so too. If not, screw them. We don't need those guys.
Yeah, screw this audience. A bunch of jerk-offs. All right, guys. So from me, from Stephen, from Lions of Liberty, and from Electric Libertyland, always stay plugged in to Liberty.